The battle continues in this 10th episode of the series Clash of the Titans, where the world's number 2 chess engine Torch, the new kid on the block, is up against the mighty Stockfish, the world's number 1 chess engine. In this game, Torch is playing white and Stockfish is playing black. Some said that this game can be compared to the movie Star Wars. This is due to the fact that the Master Jedi Obi-Wan Kenobi is now fighting against its apprentice, Anakin Skywalker. Some of you might ask, what is Torch? Or perhaps you haven't heard about it. Now, Torch was developed in the late 2024, and since then it became the world's number 2, overtaking Leela, Chess Zero, and Alpha Zero. Some experts who have tested the chess engine, they said that Torch values more on central control and rapid pieces development. And some experts said, and this can be very exciting, that Torch is the new Mikhail Tal of all the chess engines. It revives the romantic era of chess, where sacrifices can be seen and observed in all of its games. And rest assured that this game is no different. Let's find out if Torch can really match the mighty Stockfish. And white opens up with 1d4, f5, and we have the Dutch defense on the board. Torch continue with e4, attacks the center, attacks the flank pawn on f5. Now, some will continue bishop g5, some will play c4, knight c3, and some will play knight f6 and so on, but not e4. e4 is a very typical engine move. It's a gangster move actually, because it attacks the pawn on f5 and it centralizes and controls the center, and it's also a sacrifice of a pawn. Upon seeing this, the Master Jedi Stockfish accepted this sacrifice pawn, and Torch followed up with knight c3, attacks the pawn, and Stockfish calmly defends it by playing knight f6. Now, some human players might be tempted to play d5 instead of knight f6. Now, d5 is a serious human strategical blunder because of queen h5 with a check, and if g6 is pushed to block it, then queen takes d5. If the world's number 1 chess engine allows this to happen, if Stockfish will allow this variation to happen, then the Black King soon will realize that its kingdom is now lying in ruins. Therefore, knight f6 was played by Stockfish, and the continuation is bishop g5, g6. The idea is to develop the bishop this way. However, before g6, after bishop g5, d5 to other human players is also possible. But like I said earlier, that d5 is definitely a blunder, a serious one, because of bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and again queen h5 with a check, g6, queen takes d5, queen takes queen, knight takes queen, with the threat of a fork on the c7 square. And the only way to prevent that from happening is to move the king closer to the attack pawn But if you do that, or if the black pieces do that, then it loses the right to castle. Therefore, the most favorable move is bishop d6. However, bishop d6 also leaves the pawn on f6 capturable with a check, and if the king moves and attacks the knight, then the second pawn will fall. And if the rook attacks the knight, then Torch can just push f3 and safely protects the knight from there. Therefore, g6 was played, and then bishop c4, trying to control the light square diagonal. Bishop g7, knight e2, and c6. c6 idea is to push this pawn here and attacks the bishop away from the diagonal, and at the same time creating a very strong pawn chain. However, Torch, being the world's #2, surprises again Stockfish by playing d5. d5 is another gangster move because the pawn cannot be captured. I'll show you if the pawn will be captured like this. Then bishop takes d, queen a5, castle, e6 attacks the bishop, bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, and knight takes e4. Now the bishop can be captured by this pawn. Definitely not the queen, because if the queen will capture the bishop, then this bishop is also hanging and will only lead to a royal fork. Therefore, the pawn can capture it, definitely. But yes, the piece will be recovered soon, and the black king can no longer have or perhaps not loses the right to castle, but it will be very difficult to castle because of the knight will be posted on f6. Thus, e6 was played instead. And then knight takes e4, the best move in this position, castle, d6. d6 is a gangster move again because this pawn blocks everything from the black position. It paralyzes black by controlling these squares. Now, the bishop, the light squared bishop, has no forward mobility. The knight has forward mobility, but it is on the edge of the board, and the rook cannot move. It's paralyzed. Everyone is paralyzed on the queen side, especially the minor pieces. That is why d6 is a gangster move. And the continuation is queen a5 with a check. A bishop just retreat and covers the check. Queen a5, centralizing. Knight takes knight. Queen takes knight with the threat of mate in 1. Now, how will you play this if you are playing the white pieces? There are only 2 ways, or maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever, how many that you can think of. Some will play this like castle. King safety is the most important priority, right? So if it was me playing this, I would play this move, castle. Or maybe bishop e3, just to protect the pawn, so that in order to avoid checkmate in 1. However, Torch again played another surprise move against Stockfish by playing f4 instead. Now, it does not only diminishes the threat of mate in one, but also Torch played a very brilliant move. The pawn cannot be captured because it was defended twice. Therefore, seeing this, Stockfish probably shaking its head and diverted its attention to the b2 pawn and capture it. Rook attacks the queen retreats, and Torch castle short. Queen f5 centralizing, king run away from the diagonal, queen c5 attacking the bishop, and in this position, instead of retreating the bishop, instead of protecting the hanging light squared bishop, Torch played another surprise or brilliant move against Stockfish and pushes the pawn to f5. Now, you might wonder, f5 is like, what is f5? It's totally nothing. It's like Torch doesn't know how to play chess, because why would you leave your bishop hanging and pushes the pawn, right? But f5 is a gangster move. The pawn even cannot be captured. So this is a completely free bishop, and we have another pawn sacrifice here. This is really unbelievable now for me, even for myself. This is really unbelievable. That is why my new favorite chess program now is Torch. It's amazing. Now this pawn cannot be captured by this pawn, because in spite the fact that the bishop is hanging, it's still making its or it's still terrorizing the black's king, because it pins this pawn. Therefore, this pawn cannot be used to capture the f5 pawn. However, the f5 pawn can be captured by this pawn, by this rook, and definitely by this queen. But you won't capture this pawn with this queen, because your queen will be hanging. Therefore, just the pawn and the rook. But in spite of all that, this pawn is a gangster pawn, because it's still untouchable no matter what you do. You might as well capture the bishop, which what happened in the game. Because I'll show you, if the pawn will be captured by the g, this pawn, I'll show you a variation. If g takes f, for example, then the continuation will be rook lift to b3. Now, by capturing that pawn with your g pawn, you're opening up the file, the g file, for your disaster king. Now, it's like opening a new road, which Google will add to its app sooner or later as a new highway to hell. Because in this situation, if the queen captures the bishop, because it's totally free, right? Then the rook can now teleport to the other side of the board, pinning the bishop to the king. And if the king moves with the idea of rook g8, then bishop h6 is very decisive. Now you can never capture the bishop. And if a human is playing the black pieces and will still capture the bishop because it doesn't have a clue, then like this, then queen a1 check, will lead to checkmate in 1. Therefore, the pawn cannot be captured with the G pawn. What if it's been captured with the rook? Then rook take rook, queen takes rook. Queen can now capture it because there's no more defending piece. Then knight harasses the queen. Queen moves down to f2, and the knight continues to harass the queen. The queen runs away, attacks 2 pieces. Bishop retreats, protects the knight. Pawn up, and the idea of the pawn up or c5 pawn is to just vacate the c6 square for the knight. That's the only idea. And bishop c3 attacks the queen. Queen retreats. Then bishop takes bishop. King takes bishop. And queen f3 is trying to infiltrate the open file, or the f open file. And then the queen blocks it. Queen moves away. Knight hops to c6. Rook f1 attacks the queen. The queen moves, and the white queen renews the threat of infiltrating on the f open file. And the queen again blocks it. Queen h4, trying to look for a different infiltration. Queen moves away and renews a different or a new kind of threat with the knight g5, threatening this diagonal now, and this pawn is under attack, and at the same time the file is open. So instead of all that, instead of capturing the gangster pawn, the queen captured the hanging bishop. Rook f4 attacks the queen. Queen d5. F takes g6. Now, this is another gangster move. F takes g6. Let's say, for example, if rook takes f4, why not? It will relieve your stress, being, pressured left and right. Right? So capture it, and then the continuation will be pawn takes pawn with a check, king takes pawn, knight takes rook, queen takes d6, rook b3, queen e5, rook h3 with a check, king g8, rook g3 pinning the bishop, d5, and in this position bishop c3 wins the game. Therefore, h takes g6 instead, and then rook g4, pressuring the pawn. Rook protects. Knight c3 attacks the queen. Queen h5. Knight attacks the rook. Rook retreats, and leaving the queen, the only piece defending this pawn. Knight g3 attacks the queen again. And in this position, where do you want to move the queen? Let's explore some variations. Let's say, for example, if the queen moves to e5, then the continuation will be rook takes g6, knight a6 developing, queen g4 adding pressure, knight c5, bishop h6, king h7, bishop takes bishop, Rook takes bishop. Rook takes rook. Queen takes rook. And queen h4 check. King g8. Rook f1. Black king. All the open file as an escape route, or as escape route of the king, of the black's king. So all of white's pieces are blocking all the exit routes for the black's king. It continues b5. Knight h5. This will finishes the game quickly. Queen g6. Queen check. King h7. Knight f6 check. And if the king moves to g7, then queen g8 check. King h6. Another check. And if the king moves to g5, then h4 checkmate. That is why the queen e5 is not possible. So let's have a look again. So queen e5, a review is not possible because, or any other queen move apart from playing queen h7. So queen h7 was played, and then Torch played a very nifty move, bishop g5. Its move is like it's nothing. There's only one threat to this move. Rook h4, trapping the queen. Now, if you are black again, what will you do? So let's say, for example, let's have a look. Let's say bishop e5. Now, bishop e5 gives a hole for the queen in case if the rook plays here to attack it. So the queen can go here, right? But the continuation will be like this. Again, rook h4 attacking the queen. Queen hides. Knight e4. Rook f5. Bishop h6 attacks the queen. Queen has to move. Queen e2. b5. g4 attacks the rook. Rook retreats. Knight g5 with a fork. Queen h8. Knight takes rook. King takes knight. And then rook f1 with a check. And if the king moves to e8, then a brilliant sacrifice by white. Queen takes bishop. And in this position, the experts who have watched this game and reviewed this game, they said that this is no longer a chess game. This is a mental torture. This is psychological warfare. It's no longer a chess game. If you look at it, and if the queen captures the queen, then rook f8 checkmate. Imagine. Now, we've seen that bishop e5 doesn't work. Let's say, for example, if king moves away to give way for the queen, if rook h4 is played, let's say, because it gives the queen a vacant square to move in case if it's attacked. But the game will continue if it's like that. Then rook h4 again. Queen g8 hides. Queen d3 attacks the pawn. c5 again, just to make a hole for the knight. Queen takes pawn. Knight hops and develop. Knight h5, adding pressure to the bishop. Knight e5 attacks the queen. Great. Now the queen has to move. Or no. Or not. Bishop e7 with a check. And if the rook captures the bishop, then pawn takes rook. Check. With losing in the exchange. So king takes pawn. And queen g5 with a check. And king d6. In this position, black is already 5 plus something losing, because after knight takes bishop, then the threat will be knight f5 with a check, and the queen is lost. Or if not, if the queen moves, then rook d1 with a check, and the knight is gone as well. So therefore, any move will only lead to material losses. That is why c5 was played instead, in order to vacate the square for the knight. So, knowing that the queen will be trapped, then the queen was forced to capture the rook, and bishop takes queen, and knight c6 finally. The queen side minor pieces can now develop, but earlier they were like figurines. They were like, just to display there. Didn't even participate in the game. But now the knight hops, and perhaps it can help out with the defense. The game continues with queen g4, knight e5, queen a4, and b6. And in this position, Torch surprise again Stockfish by sacrificing the rook. It's like Torch is like giving everything. It's like giving charity to its opponent. And Stockfish replied with knight c4, attacking the rook. Rook moves back to b1. Knight takes the pawn that is the thorn of its position. Queen g4, bishop b7, queen takes pawn, bishop c6, h3, making a hole just in case, preventing back rank checkmate. Knight f5, offering an exchange of knights, which white happily accepted. Pawn takes knight, rook e1, trying to infiltrate the e open file to e7, trying to dominate the 7th rank as well. But Stockfish, knowing the plan, blocks this with its bishop, and Torch sacrifices again the rook by taking the bishop. F takes rook, and now the material disadvantage was restored. A queen for 2 rooks, a bishop for a bishop, and pawns for pawns, of course. There's just one pawn advantage. Since the rook was under attack, then the rook has to move to b8. Bishop attacks the rook. The rook attacks a pawn. Queen defended both pawns. Bishop defend the pawn that was under attack. And king moves up to h2, preventing preventing back rank check. King g7, h4, making another hole. Rook b6 and c3 attacks the bishop. Bishop retreats. Queen takes pawn. Rook e7. Bishop f2. Rook attacks the queen. Queen moves. Bishop check. Pawn blocks. Rook attacks the queen. Queen move away. Rook d to e6, doubling up, and in this position white offers an exchange of bishop, which black happily accepted, and pawn takes bishop. Now there will be a lot of shuffling or maneuvering in this position, because we are now in the endgame, and I don't want to bore you by watching the maneuvering and all that, although we can learn a lot from it. But yeah, it's kind of boring because it's already in the endgame. Now the position is winning for white because of these two pawns. Actually, it's a connected pass pawn, therefore white relies mostly on these two pawns to win the game. Again, let's go back. Let's just fast forward it. And white is now advancing its pawns, and the black pieces are trying to defend, attacks, advance, capture, attack, defend, check, move, pin, infiltration again. King has to move, advance on the pawns. Queen attacks the rook. Rook defends each other. Pawn advance, check. King has to move, and in this position white to play. Torch sacrifices the queen because Torch knew that either of this pawn will become queen in the future. Rook takes queen. G6, advance two more. G7. Now there's only one square left for promotion, and Torch knew that the king cannot just teleport from one side to another. It can never catch up. Therefore, the black king relies mostly on its rook to defend its position. However, it's quite difficult with only one rook defending two pawns or connected pawns that are advancing to the promotion squares. Therefore, next move played by Stockfish was Rook b1, King f5, Rook f1 with a check, King e6. Rook defended the promoting pawn. h6 defending, and King b4. And in this position and in this move, Stockfish with the black pieces resign the game because there is nothing more to be done. Either of the pawn will be promoted soon. So if Stockfish capture this pawn, then this pawn will promote. So there is no way for the black pieces to win in this game. Therefore, Stockfish resigned the game and dinhi na lang tataman. Dagan salamat. Hinaot doon na kamoy nakatunan. Pasensya na kamo sa kong tingog kay doon ako'y ubo og sipon. No? But still, atong kining gihimo nga video para dunay atong jutay nga kalingawan. Di na lang tataman. Bye for now.